Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to answer a question that came from one of our staff was having a call with someone who was interested in renouncing their U.S. citizenship. And the person was asking about whether renouncing their U.S. citizenship would affect what they can invest in. And so I'm going to discuss not just for Americans, but in general, based on where you live, your residency or your citizenship, how that impacts what it is that you can invest in. And as a result, should that influence your decision? So we're going to dive in. Before we do that, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, hit the all notifications, check out some of our other videos. I hope you enjoy them. And if you'd like help with these subjects of relocating and setting up internationally and forming international companies and doing international tax optimization and asset protection, all these kinds of things, please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below, or you can send us a message through our websites, offshorecitizen.net or offshorecapitalist.com. Okay. Now, let's start with the context of this person, which is, hey, they're American, living in the U.S., investing through, I don't remember what the brokerage was, but one of the major ones, and they have access to their stocks, their bonds, maybe it's the NASDAQ, the Dow Jones, various different ETFs, etc., and they're concerned, hey, if I give up my U.S. citizenship, is this going to affect me? Am I going to not be able to invest in these things? So the good news is, generally speaking, giving up your U.S. citizenship is going to increase the amount you can invest in, not decrease it. Let's go through some examples. As an American, you cannot invest typically in Russian stock markets. And interestingly, there's some very low PE major companies there. So there's potentially some good long-term investment opportunities, high dividend yield, things like that in the Russian stock exchange. And that's one example. There's a few different markets that you wouldn't be able to access as an American. In addition to that, if we look at something like crypto, you can't typically participate in IDOs, ICOs, access the exchanges that you get. You can't trade perpetual futures. You get less trading pairs. The liquidity isn't as deep, etc. So in general, it's actually going to open up the amount of things that you can invest in. What about some other people? Well, if you're a resident of the EU, which by the way, that would apply for US persons, so this would typically include US green card holders or US tax residents as well as US citizens. If you're an EU resident, not necessarily citizen in this case, but resident, then you may be restricted, at least within that region, from investing in certain things such as some of the ETFs, such as SPY. It's sometimes more difficult to make certain investments in terms of the fact that various international brokerages may not deal with you, right? Or various international private banking, wealth management solutions won't give you. But in general, you have a lot more options in the EU than you do in the US. And then if you're in some other places, like for example, if you're in Russia, if you're in Ukraine, if you're in Iran and Syria and some of these places, of course, then you're restricted as well, right? You have less markets that you can access. So in general, being resident of, say, some of the Asian countries like Singapore, Malaysia, tend to give you really great access. Some of the Latin American countries tend to give you really good access. The Middle East, UAE, tends to give you really good access. So those types of places give you the most, but the truth in general is that Americans are probably the most restricted in certain areas. There are some restrictions on certain Australians, but a lot less typically. Some restrictions on citizens of the EU, again, less. Some restrictions on people who are, from sanctioned or embargoed or whatever countries. And so if you want the maximum investment freedom, you would typically go to those places. Now, there is one kind of caveat, an exception to this, which is if we look at real estate and specifically leverage. Now, there are some countries where they only let locals have access to certain properties, such as on the coastline and examples like that. But often you're saying, hey, as a real estate investor, I want to go and I want to get a mortgage. I was talking to somebody I had dinner with maybe like a little over a week ago who was asking me about this. He said, hey, can I open up a Swiss bank account and deposit a bunch of money and then get a mortgage in a foreign country? And the answer usually is no. Most of the time, foreign banks will not provide you with mortgages in local markets. So if you're going to get mortgages, you usually need to be locally set up, or at least dealing with local banks on that. In addition to that, you're generally in a situation where it's harder to get a mortgage as a foreigner than as a local. And so that's something to be aware of. Now, there's some exceptions to this. If you exceed, the deal is big enough, then banks are willing to go through the due diligence and set things up. But usually that's not what you're talking about. So say if you're investing in the US, you're generally best building US credit and investing through US financial institutions. The same would generally be true in Canada or Australia or UK, et cetera, et cetera. There's a few within the EU that open you up. For example, often if you're an EU resident, then you can get mortgages fairly easily in places like Spain. Sometimes something similar can happen in Italy. I was just meeting with some people regarding some real estate and discussing opportunities in Italy the other day, and that's an example. So anyway, when it comes to mortgages and financing, usually being local is best. Certainly local financial institution to the local deal so they can get the security and understand it, but also ideally you have some local connections so that you can also tie in there. So I hope that helps, answers the question. And if you have further comments or questions, please put them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.